Hi, I'm ED-SKaR, and a little while ago I posted something that I thought was just a funny, silly little thing, but some people have actually asked about it and wondering kind of how I made it. So this is my submarine for Victory at Sea, and you can see that it's just the sea. I can do a better pun than that, I'll get to it. So I was looking at my Victory at Sea model, so I've got some American and some Japanese from the Pacific starter set, and I was thinking I can throw in a few more things. I can get some aircraft. I do need an aircraft carrier, I've mentioned this before, some motor torpedo boats, and of course some submarines. Well, don't submarines spend a lot of their time under the surface of the water on purpose, not sunk? And so I could actually just have one underneath and I wouldn't need to have a specific model. And so that led me to the conclusion of, well, that would be essentially just a Scenic base with nothing on it, painted in the right way. Well, I asked around and Nick from my local group suggested that I use a 15 by 55 millimeter base, I think it is. And I went on to Thingiverse and found someone who posted some bases. I'll leave a link to that. And that was then 3D printed. Of course, if you have another source of bases, you can skip this step. But that is what I ended up with, this little yellow base of an appropriate size for the submarine. All of the Victory at Sea ships come on a base with sea texture sculpted in. And it's really nicely done. And I'm not going to be able to go quite to that quality, but I can at least make a start. And essentially with the way I did this was I took some Milliput, I pressed it in to the top of the base, kind of smushed it out into a thin layer. And I wasn't necessarily worried about getting it perfectly flat. It doesn't need to be even across the whole thing because any undulations are just going to be the bigger waves. But to make the smaller little waves, now I'm sure there's better ways of doing this, but the way I did it was to tap the back of my brush, just that kind of rounded, smooth back of the brush, into the Milliput all over, and that gave me this rough kind of, look kind of like a wave. This isn't necessarily the absolute best way of doing it. Like I mentioned, there's probably better kind of methods for sculpting, but it did sell the effect well enough for me. Once the Milliput was cured, I primed it, and I painted the base in a light blue. And this is how I've been doing my my bases for Victory at Sea. But this time, I actually want to paint in the submarine. So rather than making a model of a submarine on the surface, I'm going to paint the sea as if there's a submarine underneath the surface. And so while the light blue was still wet, I wet blended in some black, and I think it's quite appropriate that I'm wet blending in on a model like this. A sea base can be wet blended. I think that's funny. And so I ended up with this long, thin shape of black paint, and all of the edges had been wet blended in so that there's not a fixed defined edge to this. It's just kind of fades out into the blue. I also wasn't necessarily strict about keeping it in a straight line. Because of the waves on the surface are going to end up having it kind of refraction and all of that on each of the waves. It probably would add to the effect if I just have a little bit of waviness here or there in the sides of this shape. Now I did let that properly dry before I went to the next step, which is to make a dark blue wash. I know I've actually got a bit of an advantage for this because a little while ago I bought some dark blue paint and I accidentally bought a gloss paint, these Revell pots. I really like the Revell aquacolor, other than I keep picking up the gloss ones. I have other gloss colors as well. So I mix the gloss dark blue paint with some matte medium, and you could use normal matte paint and gloss medium, that would work as well. But I mix my paint, some medium and some water, and that makes a pretty decent wash. In this case, I'm not using much of a surfactant because I don't think it's necessary. The gloss of the paint kind of has a little bit of that kind of effect where it doesn't want to stick, and that suits quite well. Anyway, all of the texture that I've created with the Milliput, I go over that with the kind of the dark blue wash. Really brings out my sculpting and kind of shows that my sculpting isn't that great to begin with. But I also use that dark blue to paint the base rim. Really the last step in terms of the proper painting is just to pick out the edges of some of the waves. And I have all the little spikes of the waves from in between my little presses with my brush earlier, and I'm just picking out them with a kind of a light grey blue that I have. That's not true, it's teal, light green. But I'm sure whatever colours you have access to, a grey or a light blue or a white even, to make the foam of the sea as it kind of spreads around in the waves. And the last step is literally just to paint sub on the side, and you can paint on U-boat or S-class submarine, or in my case I'm just writing sub because I'm using it as a generic base for any kind of submarine. And if I make any mistakes, I can go back with the dark blue and tidy up the edges. And that's it. It's a super simple, really easy thing to do. So long as you've got the bases and some milliput and 20 minutes, you can make and paint a submarine that is submerged. People want to know how I built it. This is how I built it. There's not much more to it than that. It was just a little bit of fun. I think it's quite interesting. I do like the effect that I've achieved with this. So yeah, that's all. My little submarine can go swimming away and maybe sink some shipping at some point. That's what submarines tended to do. But before I just end up rambling and double the length of this very short video, I'm ED-SKaR, always will be, and thank you very much for watching.